The goal is to make both of us sound incredibly smart.
We got a lot of work to do.
Maybe for me.
I doubt this makes it to the podcast.
I don't know. I might put it in the front. All right, man. You ready?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome to the show. I am super stoked to have you. And if you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are a regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, then I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That'll help me out so much more than you can imagine. This week's audiobook recommendation is Made to Stick: Why Some Ideas Survive and Others Die by Chip and Dan Heath. And I haven't read this book personally, but our guest today, Matthew McPhail, recommended this book to me. Made to Stick explores the qualities that make ideas memorable, compelling, and influential. And in the book, Chip and Dan draw from a bunch of different examples and research to present a framework of 6 key principles: simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, emotional, and stories. And if you didn't catch it, that spells success. And that enables your ideas to resonate and endure in the minds of your audience. And as I've said a million times before, things like this are critical for you to be an effective UX designer. So make sure you check out Made to Stick. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/audible trial to start your free trial and download Made to Stick completely free and help support the show in the process. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, and Kevin for all their support. And if you want to join these fine folks and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you can become a patron for as little as $3 a month. That's less than $1 an episode. And if you do that, you'll get some sweet, sweet perks for your support. And of course, if you think this show is worth sharing, then I would love it if you told some friends. So I often tell people all about ADP List, and I've got some gripes with ADP List, but every once in a while, I find somebody from ADP List that I have like an awesome connection with. And my good buddy Matthew McPhail is one of them. I am so excited to have Matthew on. Matthew is a UX principal at the Home Depot, where he works on the enterprise user experience team. He's responsible for building capability enhancements for associates across several types of roles within sales and project management. And prior to his current position, he worked at General Motors, New Balance, Warrior Sports, and a local design agency where he worked on several design projects for clients like Nissan, GE Appliances, and J.R. Clancy. And as an industrial designer, Matthew spent over 8 years primarily focused on the sporting goods and small appliance realms. And it wasn't until several years into his time in industrial design that he began to develop an affinity for the UX and service design worlds. And after working on several automotive UX and service design projects sprinkled in among his industrial design duties during his time at the design agency and then later at GM, he made the pivot full-time in enterprise UX. My man, enterprise UX. I love to see it. And in his free time, Matthew enjoys spending time with his family, pursuing his interests in Lego Technic sets, which you can't see, but I promise you guys, in the background, it's a thing of beauty. I'm so jealous of his Lego sets. Cooking new recipes at home and shuffling his 2 girls around to their basketball and softball games. And he also enjoys long weekends with his wife, exploring the towns in western and northern Michigan. Matthew, welcome to Beyond UX Design, man. I am so incredibly excited to have you on today. How's it going, man?
Jeremy, man, it's great to see you. Man, it's been too long. Super stoked and happy to be here and join you. I love this podcast. I'm a regular listener. So
right on, man. I really appreciate that.
Super excited to be on the other end for once.
Hell yeah. And for everybody out there, I didn't pay Matthew anything. That was not a sponsored plug. So Matthew, man, like I said, I met on ADP List, and I've had a lot of conversations on ADP List. The majority of them been sort of weird. I would say not very beneficial to either me or the other person because of just the awkwardness of it. Yeah. But I have met some really amazing people through that platform, and you were one of them, man. And you have got such an incredible backstory. You came from industrial design over to UX, and I think we met because you were looking at, at the time trying to get into UX, or maybe you were already in UX. But I want to talk to you about this. So you've got a really interesting backstory. I gave a little bit of bio, but you've got more than that to tell. What would you do before you got into UX? Tell me a little bit about that industrial design background.
Yeah, so went to the College for Creative Studies in Detroit, class of 2009, with industrial design degree. Really thought kind of all through high school, actually, I was going to be an engineer, and then realized pretty quickly that no, way too much math for me. And was lucky enough to discover industrial design and had, a really great school in my backyard here in Detroit to do that. So graduated 2009, and right out of the gate, went and worked for a company called Vornado, doing kind of air moving fans, air purifiers, and also some steam cleaning products. And spent about 6 months doing that, and then started doing some freelance. Because of course, after 6 months as a professional, you're ready to do freelance, right?
Yeah, of course, right? Yeah.
But Coleman, the camping company, was right there in Wichita as well, where I was at. So started doing some freelance with them through some networking, and was really enjoying it. But was kind of yearning to get back to Detroit, where I'd spent my formative years. Ironically enough, I'm actually from Wichita, Kansas originally, but I wanted to get back to Detroit, where most of my friends and my girlfriend at the time was from. And so took a job with Warrior Sports designing hockey and lacrosse equipment, thinking like, okay, this is a dream job, right? I played lacrosse in high school, so like this was like the perfect marriage for me of like my passion and my professional craft. So moved back to Detroit and spent the next 4 years designing lacrosse hard goods across arm guards, gloves, shoulder pads, all the things that lacrosse player would wear, and getting to work really closely with elite lacrosse players, kind of all over the map, at the college level and the professional level, and did that for 4 years, and started kind of feeling like I was plateauing a little bit, and maybe wanted to do something a little bit different. And while this was happening, I started kind of noticing like the things that bugged me about products and just experiences in general were rarely like the form factor or like the physical sort of attributes of the product. It was either a service related to it, or the way that I had to purchase it, or a digital experience I was having in an app or something like that. And well, that's kind of interesting. I don't know. That's probably says something about me, but decided I wanted to sort of branch out and get some agency experience, and found a local agency that my really good friend was working at, who said, hey, we're looking for somebody who's got an ID background that may be interested in some amount of digital design, and some UI design. I said, well, I think I could do that. It sounds really fun. I'm super interested in that. And so did that for a couple of years, where I worked across, ID, UX, and UI. So like we chuckle often when we see the UX UI designer job title, right? Mine was ID,
Oh, yeah.
UX, UI. So it's like,
I got all of the acronyms, man.
kind of a nightmare, but I really enjoyed it, and it was a great experience. And that was really like my first official foray into really the world of what, I now call UX, right? Sort of thinking through how to organize information in the digital space, and sort of how to think through a product that's truly and functionally digital. And so did a lot of what I would call digital UX work while also doing the related physical product for that. So finding this really interesting niche of having to design not only the package, but the sort of digital interface or digital experience that goes along with it. And did that across automotive and small appliance spaces, and really just grew an affinity for it. I was kind of at that point fully invested and in love with sort of the what I would call like intangible or non-physical space. And so after that, decided, you know what, I'm going to lean totally into the intangible space, and said I'm gonna take on service design at General Motors. And
Right
so
on, yeah.
did that for about a year, was really digging it, although that role became a little bit more around like really just evangelizing design thinking and design process, because it wasn't very mature at this particular area of GM. And spent a year there doing that, doing a lot of like qualitative research, things that I was doing on the ID side for sure, and really sort of helping frame and define problems and opportunity spaces for the business within services for the automotive purchasing and finance experience. And was doing that for a year, and then kind of as luck would have it, I got a call to potentially consider joining as a director of design at a football startup in Detroit, and then spent the 4 years or so there doing that, leading industrial design, UX, and brand creative for a really small startup in Detroit, and so kind of got back into industrial design a little bit more at a leadership level. But really, like I said, was still very much in love with all of the intangible UX pieces as well. So yeah, quite the journey.
Right on. So you mentioned something too that's kind of interesting. You were talking about building, or designing all these physical products, right?
Yep.
But you noticed that it was sort of the other things that really were what was bugging
Yep.
you. And you mentioned that you got into service design later, but it's interesting you were really starting to kind of notice that lack of service design around these physical products. It isn't just the things like the maybe it was the app, maybe it was the e-commerce store, but there may have been other things. Kind of interesting. At the time, did you realize that that's what it was, or did you just come to understand that later? That that's what that problem that pain point for me was the service design was lacking.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. I don't think out of the gate I realized that there was actually like a design connection there, right? That it was just that like, man, these are just the pieces of this like product experience that bug me the most, or like the purchase experience or the digital experience within the app, or like even things as, benign as like having to stand in line at a grocery store because the checkout experience is not like, so poorly considered, right?
Yeah.
And I just kept noticing all of these like what I would call digital experiences or intangible experiences that were really bugging me. I didn't make the connection, I think, right away that like, hey, these are designed just like a lacrosse helmet is designed, right? I just wasn't really in that headspace. But over time, I began to realize just through my own journey of kind of just discovering, searching, reading that like, yeah, these are designed just like we design physical products. I mean, the medium is a little bit different, but it's actually a very similar process in a lot of ways. And we can be just as thoughtful with customer service experiences, or like I said, grocery store checkout experiences as we can be with how this football helmet fits or how this shoulder pad fits. So it was a slow journey, but I got there.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. You mentioned another thing too, though, that I thought was kind of fascinating. And I wonder, is this something industrial designers also do? But you mentioned talking to the lacrosse players, understanding, I assume you were understanding their pain points and needs. I want a helmet that does this. I want to, I don't know what you call lacrosse. I've never played lacrosse. What do you call the net, the thing you throw with? Does that have a name?
Just a stick, yeah.
It's just called a stick.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Got a head and a handle, basically.
Okay.
Yep.
So, that kind of stuff, you were talking to them, I assume, about how to design a better product, right?
Yeah.
And is that something that most industrial designers will do? I assume you're out talking to users.
Yeah.
I guess my point really is just I'm noticing sort of the incredible similarities between how you design a physical product versus a digital product. Is that a connection you also made, or is that something that other industrial designers may not do? I'm curious.
Yeah, it was actually the connective tissue for me to start thinking about like a career in UX. Because absolutely, right, as industrial designers, we absolutely start with our users, right? We understand what are your pain points, what are your needs, what are the compensatory behaviors that you're doing that are designing around a bad product experience or whatever it may be, how the product fits, where, whatever it is, any sort of physical realm that you can think of, right? We are really immersing ourselves in that world with that user to understand everything about that product experience. And so it's everything from, right, like not only what do you not like about the current product that you have, but what are you trying to do that you can't do with this physical product, right? Or what are the things that you wish it could do that it doesn't do? And so that piece for me was really like the aha moment where I was like, man, this process of like starting with the users and really understanding their needs and starting to build and define the problem spaces and those opportunities to go design things for was virtually identical to what I started, reading and seeing a lot of UX designers doing. There was certainly a fork in the road at some point where UX designers would go off and do wireframes and other things, right? And I was doing more like thumbnail sketching and then some CAD. But really that beginning piece to me is almost identical. And it was really my bridge to UX that I really leaned into early.
Yeah, right on. It's funny. I know a lot of architects, tons of architects that have turned to UX design.
Yep.
And I don't know that I know any other industrial designers. I think you may be maybe there's another person I'm forgetting. But it's something that I don't really see very often. And it's kind of interesting because, like you said, those two, jobs almost parallel each other quite a ways until, you obviously fork and design the digital versus the physical piece. But that's really fascinating. So I'm curious, like when you said, like, what was the thing that went through your mind? You're like, you know what, I'm done. Was it just that you mentioned plateauing a little bit in your career, but is that really what it was? Or was there some other impetus that was just like, I am totally done with industrial design. I want to pursue this UX gig.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a number of things. One of the things that really started to wear on me with industrial design was the amount of time it would take to bring things to life. So, particularly like in an automotive space, I worked on a sort of in-vehicle infotainment system for Nissan back in 2017. And I did that in concert with considering some of sort of just the form factors of the interior, and obviously like the physical button relationships on a console command or a steering wheel, and how that relates to your cluster display and center stack display and all of that stuff. And that work was like 2017 and didn't see the light of day until 2023.
Wow.
And so like you think about like a football helmet as another example, right? We were working 3, 4 minimum, but often 5 years ahead, thinking 4 to 5 years from now, because of just the amount of, and particularly in sporting goods where like you're dealing with somebody's health and safety.
Yeah, of course.
You've got to be, really, really prudent about your development process. And so as somebody who was, primarily in the sporting goods space and having to deal with those considerations and have to be ultra careful and prudent, it just took a long, long time to get and bring things to life. And it just began to kind of wear on me. I don't know if it's just my general impatience. My wife would tell you that's probably what it is. But just, like being so envious of seeing other, folks in the digital and app spaces be able to riff on something, hop into a tool, and then go and test it like, within 2 or 3 days, to me was just like kind of unfathomable. And the speed at which you could work was just really attractive. And so that was certainly a primary reason for making a consideration. And I just think there was just innate interest in intangible experiences, which I can't quite put my finger on, but it just seemed to be where I gravitated to. I was less interested in the form factor of the physical thing and more about the experience with the product and buying the product and all the things surrounding it versus the artifact itself.
Yeah, because you think, in the case of something like software, you could, in theory, get a prototype out in a couple of weeks and have it mass, audience in a matter of weeks. You can iterate pretty quickly with a physical prototype, but it's going to be one.
Right.
It's not going to be thousands of them. So it's a fascinating thing. It's a really interesting concept I hadn't really thought of. But yeah, you're right. It's really hard to do sort of agile, continuous delivery type of stuff with a physical product.
Well, yeah. I mean, you got to think about like, again, I'll use like the most recent industrial design example from my career with the football helmet. You're making major capital commitments to a tool, right? So like, you've got to be really sure that like this thing is right, and we're going to get 10 years of product out of this tool, right? Which you have to sort of bake into the cost of doing business. And so it really kind of becomes challenging to sort of iterate quickly in those spaces because there's just so much commitment to the capital expenses that you got to make that you just got to get it right. So you end up iterating. And then once you commit, that's it, right? There is, I mean, you can do some things in sort of a similar way you would do agile with product design, but it's definitely a lot less robust than on the UX side. I think
it's definitely like a waterfall approach if we're comparing it to software.
Think that's for sure.
What's crazy too with the sporting goods is I'm just thinking, but like I imagine sports science could change almost any minute, right? Someone comes back, like with your example of the football helmet, and they say, well, we found a new way to decrease concussions. And if that wasn't part of your original design and spec, you're 2 or 3 years in, you might have to scrap all that work and start over because that helmet might no longer be approved by whatever body approved sporting goods. I don't know. Yeah. But that's kind of, I could definitely see that frustrating. So you decided that you wanted to get into UX. Tell me about that process a little bit. I know you and I met and we talked a little bit. You put a portfolio together. How did that work, getting it from ID into UX? Was there some process that helped you to get in?
It's a great question. I was really fortunate to sort of identify early that I had some of that sort of what I would call digital product or intangible, service experience design desires. And so was really thoughtful about, particularly at my next gig after Warrior, trying to find something that allowed me to play in that sandbox a little bit while still leaning on my ID skills. And so finding a local agency that was doing that sort of suite of work was kind of my way in. And I was really tactical about finding places where I felt like I could continue leaning on ID while I'm transitioning, but like be exposed to and work alongside folks who were in the digital product design and UX spaces. And so for me, that was kind of the first choice. And so I, again, like for a couple of years there, was dabbling in a lot of these digital product design, all the way down to sort of UI elements and screen design pieces, and was doing a lot of learning like on my own early in my career. And one of the things I love about the UX community that I wish the ID community did better was this sort of like fostering a culture of learning and development and sort of doing that quote unquote free of charge for the most part, right? So like all of these amazing YouTube channels and resources and things out there on LinkedIn and other places that are really evangelizing UX and the hard and soft skills associated with it were actually really easy for me to find. And when I started to get really serious after that couple of years at the agency and then at General Motors, I went back into to industrial design as a leader with Zenith, but was still trying to stay very close to like how we're thinking about the e-com experience and how we're thinking about, arming our reps with the right tools to go and sell and like different things that weren't really ID. And really just trying to focus on, okay, like we got to think about the whole end customer experience here, not just the product itself. And so I had a lot of good fortune early to find opportunities to be able to kind of flex both muscles and build both muscles. But it wasn't until, my time at Zenith had come to an end and you and I connected where I was really serious about like, I'm really going to dive headfirst into UX as like a full-time thing. I want to fully leave the ID world for a while and like really jump in with both feet and see what UX is all about. And so it was a lot of like online resources. I was super fortunate to find, a few of your videos early on like whiteboarding challenges and other things.
Oh, right on, man. Cool.
Then it was a lot of like self-taught things, right? And so I even considered dabbling with like, some different boot camps and stuff because there were some hard skills things that I was concerned, like maybe this would like, really fast forward my ability to learn some of those things. I just don't know whether it's like all the tools like Figma or how to wireframe, how to think about IA and things like that. But it was a really organic, self-taught kind of journey, and one that took a little bit of I guess risk and kind of leaning into that fear of the unknown because I just didn't know what I didn't know about UX going in, and I'm still learning right today.
Oh, we all are, yeah. So that's really interesting because I heard you say again with I think it was the Zenith gig you had. You were working with sales teams to arm them with the right stuff. And again, I'm hearing all this service design.
Yeah.
Like you started off. It's like you started off. Nobody can see me. I'm using my hands, but you started off down here, and you started with industrial design. You started to kind of go up a little bit to the higher level of the overall service. And it sounds like you ended up just starting to narrow down again and getting back down to the sort of not in the weeds, but because I think you're like principal, so you're still pretty high in the weeds, but it's kind of interesting. Just your journey of like this sort of back and forth to service design to back down, up and down. So that's really fascinating. I love that, man. One of the things that you mentioned a second ago is kind of interesting. I'm curious about you were kind of weighing whether or not to do a boot camp.
Yep. And
it sounds like you ultimately decided not to. For anybody out there that might be in a similar position to you, did you have any, maybe advice might be the wrong word, but your thought process at least on why you found that the boot camp was maybe not the right approach for you and you decided to go the self-taught route?
Yeah, I actually, candidly, I dabbled with one for a few weeks because it was almost for me, I had some downtime. I wanted to kind of decompress after going through a pandemic, working for a business that sort of serves organized sports and all the chaos around that with the pandemic. So I really took 3 months off to just be like, okay, I'm going to level set and really dig into UX and on the hard skill side and flirted with a couple of boot camps because it just felt like for me, I'm somebody who always works better under deadlines, and like giving me the structure of saying, you have to do this and learn this by this date felt like something that would be super helpful for me. But ultimately what I found out is I think for, folks that maybe have absolutely no exposure whatsoever to the concepts around design thinking and UX, that it may be pretty useful. But for me, it felt very much like just familiarizing me myself or revisiting things that were, sort of already known for me in terms of like how to go into research, how to do qualitative research, how to generate insights and problems and do direct observation and ethnography and all of that stuff, and then sort of translate that and synthesize that into opportunities. And so I ultimately decided, nope, not for me. Certainly not something that I think would be super helpful for me. And just kind of continue to lean down that self-taught kind of meandering path of just, going to different resources, taking different free online courses and things, and just watching a lot of videos and doing a lot of reading, which was really how I spent that 3 months.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned quantitative, qualitative. ethnography and all these things. And I'm just thinking like, how many boot camps actually talk about that with anybody anyway? Yeah. That's probably not something I doubt, ethnography, maybe one or two instructors, but on a grand level, I'm sure ethnography is not something that's even mentioned once, which is a damn shame. But, that's the state of UX education today, I guess.
Yeah.
One of the other things that was kind of interesting, one of the roles when you were, you said you had ID, UX, UI, was really fascinating there is it sounds like, I'm curious, I want to tell me if this is wrong. It sounds like you almost had, an industrial design role with the UX apprenticeship at the same time, like kind of overlaps. You were learning as you went on the job, which was kind of fascinating. And one of those things too that I'm noticing. How long have you been in UX specifically? Number of years? Has it been?
Yeah, I mean,
2,
I
3
guess
years?
like if you added it all up, you could probably say like 4 years, probably.
4 years, yeah.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating though, and you are now principal at Home Depot, Home Depot, right? So that's a high level. And I think it speaks a lot to your ability to learn to take those previous, hard skills that you learned in industrial design and then apply them without having a huge gap in that experience. And I think that's really fascinating. And I think honestly, for me, I don't know, maybe I'm projecting, but I feel like that hands-on experience that you had learning from other people probably helped you quite a bit, if I had to guess, right? Like that kind of apprenticeship sort of approach that you took finding that role.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, like I said, it started small with, I'll give you like 2 really good examples. I mean, the one that I mentioned to you around like having to figure out the design of the steering wheel and where buttons went, and then that connection of that button to that interface and figuring out that piece. And that's a really good example of like where my ID and UX had to come together, but also like working on fridges. And most fridges now, like GE appliances have displays, and these displays have micro information architectures of like how to manage the different settings and menus. And so, yeah, being able to get exposed to that stuff while being the quote unquote industrial designer on the project was a huge leg up for me. It was a major advantage for sure.
So I'm curious, when you were applying for all of these UX jobs, what did recruiters and hiring managers think of your industrial design background? Did they make that connection, or was that a connection you had to continuously reinforce as you had these conversations?
It was definitely something I had to reinforce. I found that recruiters were certainly less familiar with what industrial design was, particularly if they were recruiting for like enterprise UX positions. And so having to help like them make the connections of like, here's what I was doing previously. Here is some examples, by the way, of like digital design work that would be more familiar to what you're looking for. But here's how the process I go through as a designer is very similar to what you're looking for. And the outputs or the mediums on the other end are really the less important piece in the grand scheme. And so it was not easy at first because I was getting a lot of, commentary around like, hey, you seem to be really talented. You seem to understand the process, but we're really looking for somebody who's got more UX experience.
Just makes me so angry.
Yeah. And so like the thing I had to sort of like recalibrate all the way down to like resume and words and the semantics was like, really, I've been doing UX the entire time. Like I've been doing user experience. It's just the medium was different. So like, how do I take that? And make that boiled down and like really tractable for a recruiter to understand? Like, yes, you're looking for somebody who's doing enterprise software. I've never designed a software package or an application, but I understand the process and I have the hard skill because I've gone and learned them. So it wasn't easy at first, but over time I learned through practice and interviewing, frankly, right? Like, what are the words they're saying? What are they asking for? What are the skills that they think that they're looking for? How do I tailor my resume and my portfolio to better show that I have that skills? And how do I also lean into the diversity that I bring as an industrial designer and thinking maybe a little bit differently about the constraints or the other limitations of software? So we got there, but it was not a linear path. And certainly chatting with people like you on ADP was super helpful for helping me clarify what are those transferable skills? How do I talk about them? I mean, how do I lean into those as a benefit and not a hindrance?
So it sounds like, I don't know, again, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, so tell me if I'm wrong. It sounds like you had to do some experimentation with how you approached talking about your work.
Absolutely.
How did you keep track of that? Is there something where did you have a sheet somewhere where you're like, saying that word didn't work or explain this thing better? I'm curious how you tracked that evolution over time.
So this may seem kind of crazy, but I actually did create a spreadsheet. So every time I had an interview or a conversation, I kept notes around.
I love that, man.
Not only do I feel like I missed or I may add a misstep in the interview, but like what were the words and phrases and skills that they were looking for, and so that I could begin over time with enough data to like kind of quantify like. It's these 3, 4, 5 words I keep hearing.
Yes, I love that.
They're saying this, but they mean this. So I've got to translate this word to that word. And so it was it was difficult at first because I'm like, I feel like we're saying the same thing, but we're talking past one another in this interview.
Man, yeah.
And ultimately it's just a recalibration of some of the words that I was using to sort of better align with what they're looking for, all the way down to like, we mentioned the word agile, right? Like I was doing a lot of work in an agile manner. We weren't officially calling it agile with ceremonies and grooming and, Jira stories and all of that stuff.
No Scrum Master, right?
No Scrum Masters, right? But I was working that way, right? And not even knowing that I was really working that way in a codified manner. And so it was about going back and realizing like, oh yeah, that's a really good example, like an agile process I took to build this display or these series of displays and sort of get a V1 out and then iterate on that and do V2, V3, add features, etc. It's always really a learning process over time of like, what are the skills they're looking for? What are the words that they're saying? And then how do I go back to the well of things that I have and reframe those in a way that makes more sense to them and speaks their language?
So, this is something I tell people all the damn time. And I don't know how many people actually take this advice, but I love to hear that this actually worked for you. But I tell people, treat your job hunt like an experiment, and
Yep.
you can't perform an experiment if you're not tracking all the variables and the things that have changed and the outcomes from those different variables that have changed, right? And so it sounds like you did exactly that. The other thing I tell people too is, take notes. I tell people that use the example of like football players, they practice or they have a game, they record it. And then they go watch the tapes, go back and watch the tapes from your interview.
Yep.
If you can, and you can legally do this, record yourself, don't break any laws, record people illegally. Ask them if it's okay to record it for for your own personal thing, but record it and listen back to yourself and hear how you're explaining,
Absolutely.
the words that are coming out of your mouth. And does it make sense? Did what I just say actually make sense? And I think we'd be surprised often. A lot of times when people think they go back, you always have this bias that like when I don't know, there's probably some name for this cognitive bias, but you did a great job and you're, like kind of like a Dunning-Kruger sort of thing. When in reality, you just completely botched, and our memories of events are obviously terrible. So I love that you did that. I'm curious, how many rejections did you get before you got the first official UX gig?
I'll be totally honest. I mean, I got pretty lucky, to be totally fair. I had, I would say 3 official rejections and one kind of unofficial rejection where I don't think there was a lot of mutual interest. And sort of ironically, the Home Depot gig that I ultimately ended up taking and am in now, was one that reached out to me. So as I was going through this process of tweaking words on the resume and doing things, I mean, I was also taking care of LinkedIn and making sure that like, hey, this tool that we have at our disposal to go out and look more attractive to recruiters, is something that we have to groom, right? Like everything else. And consistently like focus on making sure we're using the right words, talking about the right things. There's algorithms, all of those things, right? That recruiters use. And so I wholeheartedly believe that like that proactive outreach from that recruiter at Home Depot was the direct result of me going through that iterative process, changing some words, changing some phrases, describing my experience in a slightly different way that seems to match more with the words and phrases they're using, was the sole reason that I got lucky with that recruiter. And it happened to be somebody who really understood the power and value of research and how important research was. I'm super fortunate to work at a place now that really values research. And so again, that connective tissue of all the experience I'd had doing dozens and dozens of interviews and ethnographic sessions and direct observation and journaling and all the things that we do, really clicked with that recruiter. But I don't know that I would have gotten that ping had I not gone through the rigor of like really tailoring my experiences to speak to the words that they're using, which is not something going in I had considered I should have.
I love that advice, man. LinkedIn people, there's so many people out there that I feel like just ignore LinkedIn or they just sort of treat it as another social media site like Facebook or Twitter or something. And it is, yeah, you could treat it like that. There's certainly aspects of it. I'm not saying it's all business and shouldn't, go on LinkedIn with like a suit and a tie. But I feel like there's just so much of it that people aren't using it to their advantage, and there's so many ways to do, like you said, talk about the work you've done, talk about what you know, and use it to promote yourself, because recruiters are on there. It's like probably, I would say most recruiters, probably the first place they go to start looking for people when they want to go and they have a quota to fill. So it sounds like it worked out for you. So I'm curious, with your case studies, did you write your case studies about all of your industrial design work and sort of use that UX language to talk about the work that you did? Or did you do completely new case studies from scratch with some other just software based? Or how did you approach creating your case studies?
Yeah, it's a good question. I didn't actually create any case study specifically for UX. What I did is went back and looked at all of my classic, quintessential industrial design projects, as well as the projects that had sort of digital components or experiences within it, and just made sure that those spoke to my process and communicated my process and had the steps in them that those folks were looking for. I know that if you're not coming from a design background, that may be harder to do, and creating some case studies is certainly something that you can do. And I would encourage people to do that if they don't have that work. But I would wager that most people that are coming from other backgrounds have UX experience and they just don't realize it, right? Whether it's like going and understanding a problem space and sort of iterating on the problem. That's UX, right? Or even the piece that doesn't get talked about a lot, although I know you talk about it all the time, and it's huge, is relationship building. Like that stops, like talk about how you built relationships and worked on a team together and like guided them through a creative process, right? All of those things and all of those pieces are super important. And you said something too about feedback that I think is really important, particularly for younger folks, not in just UX, but in general, is be very proactive about taking notes about those interviewing experiences. I think so often what I see on LinkedIn and other places is applicants getting bummed out that they didn't get feedback or they didn't get a response to why not me? And I think one of the big things early in my career that clicked for me was it's not really incumbent upon anybody else to tell you why you didn't get that gig, right? You going and being thoughtful about the words you're using, the moments that mattered that you missed on, and doing that assessment and that analysis and then that refinement out of that is huge. And I think that it's really incumbent upon each person to do that for themselves, not rely on a recruiter or hiring manager to give you 7 bullets on what you missed. It's great if they do,
sure, yeah,
right?
Yeah,
but in this increasingly litigious society we live in, it's getting harder to get that feedback. So be proactive about where you're missing, what opportunity, what question did you miss? What did they say that you didn't know a good answer to? Those are all opportunities to refine that. And doing that in a Miro board or spreadsheet like I did, whatever, is a place to continuously iterate and improve.
Absolutely, man. And it's funny because I feel like it's one of those things when you, again, even if you're taking notes, unless you're doing it right there in the moment, if you go back even 30 minutes later, I feel like you're going to kind of, sugarcoat some of this or look at it through rose-colored glasses. But if you can just take out your phone and just put records, maybe not even listening to the other person, but listening to what you say and how you said it. And I'm willing to bet if you go back, you're listening God, that was so stupid. I cannot believe I answered that question that way, Yeah. The other thing too that a lot of people I don't think really do is, write down the questions they asked you.
Yes.
And then if you didn't answer it well, go research online and see how other people would answer that question. Because a lot of these, I'll be honest, dude, I've done a lot of interviewing. And a lot of times what people tend to do is they wait until the last minute because they're all busy. They have meetings. They go from one meeting straight into the interview. And then, they probably Googled a list of interview questions before, unless it's a big company with a lot of rigor. Google, for instance, has a lot of rigor around how they do interviewing, right? So a place like that is very different from a little startup. So where you're applying certainly will change maybe how this happens, but I'm willing to bet most people doing interviews probably don't put that much effort into the interview, which is unfortunate.
Totally.
But what that means is it's sort of, you could use that to your advantage as the person applying because they're probably pulling generic questions from the internet. So go online and find the generic questions and prep and just practice and get a bullet list and put it up there on your screen if you're doing remote and have those answers ready to go. Don't cheat and pull someone else's answer, obviously. Come up with your own, but you can at least get a good sense for how other people would approach answering this question. So anyway, I love that you did that. And I love that you took notes. And I feel like that's something most people probably don't do. And
Yep.
it's really unfortunate.
Yeah. And I'll give you another example of how I had to learn kind of on the fly and missed the first time and learn from that is, in UX, there's the sort of vaunted whiteboard challenge. And we can sort of maybe another time talk about like, is it ethical or not? I know there's a lot of debate around that in UX, but that is something that's very specific to the UX industry. I can't ever think of a time where I was asked to prove my mettle in real time with a whiteboard challenge for an ID role. And so very early on when I was beginning the interview process and their recruiters were talking about the whiteboard challenge, like I had no idea what they were talking about. I'm like, what is that? But you don't want to say that on a recruiting call, right? So I'm like, oh crap. So I literally, to your point, I mean, I had Post-its laid out on my desk. And when the recruiter would say a word or mention something that was like unfamiliar to me, I'd write it down with a question mark so that I could go and look what that was. That was ironically another thing that led me to you was like really immersing myself in this whole like how to master the whiteboard challenge piece, which is like anybody who's been a designer knows this process, right? Like this is not a new process. It's a regimented process, but you've done it before, I promise. Here's the ways to win, and here's the ways to be really good at it. I found one of your videos on YouTube. And I was like, man, this is great. He's doing a live demo of how to go through a whiteboarding process and found it super helpful. There was one other one by, I think, Anthony Conta, where he had kind of a live demo of a whiteboarding challenge. It was just great, right? And so like, that's just an example of getting better the second time. The first time I heard that, I wasn't super familiar with it. Went and did my own research, really like boned up on what it was and practiced a couple times in my spare time. And then I was ready for it the next time. I wasn't surprised by it and I knew how to do it. And I knew like, hey, you have all of these skills. It's just about putting them together in a 45-minute session and doing exactly what they want to see. So there are many examples like that when I was pivoting where I didn't have experience doing that, but I heard it once, I understood what it was, wrote it down, researched it, like really boned up on it and was able to do it the second time without much of an issue.
Yeah, there's a lot of debate around whiteboard challenges and whether or not they're ethical and are they biased and things like that. Are they discriminatory? I personally, my thing, because you mentioned it, so we'll go on a rabbit hole and talk about this for a second. But I hate the take-home challenges. And I think for me personally, someone giving you a take-home challenge, they are missing 90% of the work that you're putting into when they ask you to present a finished product in a meeting. It is absolutely, to me, it says a lot about the company that's hiring you because it tells me that they don't really know what they're actually looking for. They're probably looking for a visual designer to have a really slick, pretty looking UI at the end. And they're not really thinking about any of the stuff that leads to that UI. The in-person challenges, though, I think it gets, I can see what they're going to be like working with them. I can see what questions they ask. I can see the thought process. And at the end of the day, the UI piece for me is, it's important. It's an important piece of the process. But I think, for me, the other part is I would weigh that higher. That's my personal opinion. Yeah. Some other people might disagree. They're terrifying, though. And like you said, it's like you got to practice. You do it once, you do it twice, you do it 10 times, and you get to a point where it's just like kind of fun. And you're just like having fun with people. And I think that's something that a lot of people kind of miss with the whiteboard challenge. But anyway, I'm actually thinking about doing an episode where I go through that kind of refining it a little bit, but going through that presentation and stuff and like doing a sample one. But
I definitely think it's worthwhile. And I'll just I'll echo your sentiment around whiteboard challenges. I mean, once I understood what they were and what they were actually, why they were actually valuable to those hiring managers, I actually thought they were a great thing. I wish they would have done more of that in ID to sort of not suss out your hard skills, because you should be able to discern that in a portfolio, in a conversation. But how do you work with people? Are you diligent about being inclusive of stakeholders? What's important to a product manager? What did your business partner say is important? How are you going to rally and build relationships? Like, you could tease some of that stuff out in whiteboard challenges. And so I think, they're a great tool for just understanding, how does this person think? How are they going to be to work with? And how do they attack and solve problems? And how are they doing that inclusively, like right out of the chute?
Yeah, anybody out there looking for some of that stuff, reach out to me. You can Google that Jeremy Miller whiteboard. I actually have a Fig Jam template, or is it a Figma? It's either a Figma or Fig Jam template. I can't remember. But I created a template. I think it's Fig Jam. I created a template to kind of use. So like, if you are doing a whiteboard challenge, you can go online, just grab the Figma template, copy it, and use it. You don't have to start from scratch. So anyway, good stuff, man. I love it. So let me ask you this. First UX gig, I know you had the kind of IXD UX role. or ID UX role. Your first UX gig, how'd you feel when you started? Did you feel like you were ready?
Oh man.
Kind of had a little practice before, but I'm curious what that first one was
Yeah,
like.
I mean, I guess my first officially titled UX gig, interestingly enough, is my gig now at Home Depot. I was like I said, I was doing it before in service design at GM, and I was certainly doing it at agency, although I was called an industrial designer first. But my first real foray is like, yep, it says UX next to my name on LinkedIn is at Home Depot. But it has been great. I'm still learning a lot, right? I think the diversity that I bring with the industrial design background and just thinking about maybe problems from a different angle is super valuable. But I also work with folks who have been doing service design for 15 years and are maestros at super complex process mapping and entity relationship diagramming and other things that are like really important pieces of the puzzle that I just haven't done as much of. And so learning all the time and finding and giving yourself grace and space to continuously learn has been a real mantra for me, not having to have all the answers, but knowing where to go to get the answer and knowing who to learn from, both inside your job and outside your job, has been really my key to success.
Yeah, I think that's it, man. That's the key to success in almost anything, though.
Sure.
Just continually learning. I don't care what your job is. It could be literally anything.
Right.
Waiting tables, washing dishes, plumber, carpenter, UX designer, doctor, lawyer,
100%.
just, constantly learning. I love that, man. So I'm curious though, now that you've been in this role for how long? 2 years?
I've been in this role, it'll be a year next month. So I started as a contractor and then converted about halfway through, and also kind of at the same time promoted into the principal. So I started as like a staff level essentially, and then promoted it as a principal in a new space in January.
So about a year. So what have you learned since then?
What have I learned?
Is it even possible to summarize it?
I mean, so much. I've learned, here's a big thing I've learned, and I think this is a really important thing for people to understand, is UX is never going to be the linear process that a book or a video is going to tell you that it is. I think for me, that's been a major aha. I've known that throughout my career, but particularly in industrial design, one of the differences I would say is you have to be a little bit more militant about following a process, again, because of those capital expenditures and things at the end that are so important. And so it tends to be, yes, it's a double diamond, it's a design thinking process and all of that, but it tends to follow a bit more linear serial path. And UX and enterprise UX especially, there is a near constant iteration, discussion, discovery, building on qualitative data, and sort of like working in little bits and pieces and chunks that is different than IT. And so that's been the biggest thing for me. The big eye opener for me is like, it is not this clean, polished, linear serial path. It is this messy, convoluted, sometimes frustrating, sometimes ambiguous and unclear process where I'm jumping from a conversation around discovery with an associate and then jumping into like a wireframing piece or consolidating and synthesizing Post-it notes from a different conversation,
Yeah.
right? Or whatever it is. We're doing a quick process map to make sure that I understand what I heard. So for me, it's constant context switching. It's constant jumping between phases of that design thinking process, which I don't know coming in people would necessarily know to be true unless you've lived it. That's a big takeaway for me and something that I would want everybody to know.
Thinking back to when you started this journey, when you started that thing and that light bulb went off or that switch flipped, what advice would you give 7-year younger Matthew about getting into UX?
I would say there's a couple of things. It's not, like I just said, it is not a clean, polished, linear serial path. The process never works that way. The second thing I would say, and that's something I know that you talk a lot about, and I tend to agree with you on, is don't be so focused on the hard skills. You can learn Figma. Like, yes, you got to learn these tools. You got to know this stuff. You've got to be able to do that. But I would have really told myself, lean much more into not only like how to build relationships and work with other collaborative partners in the UX space, but also like take in time to understand what are those other soft skills that you have to develop.
Man,
It's
important.
so important. And I think whenever you're talking about a career pivot or a career switch, I think it's natural to like want to index to like, okay, what are the hard skill deficits I have that I have to eliminate immediately? And not so much like, what are all the soft skills I need to continue to sort of build and foster and grow? And so that would be the other message for me is like, don't focus so much on just learning the tools. understand the why behind the process, understand how to build relationships, understand what's important to a product manager, what's important to a business partner, how to speak more of their language more of the time, and not just come at it from a strictly design perspective. We're all there, hopefully, in defense and in service to the customer and or the associate in enterprise. But everybody's going to have a slightly different lens to that. Understanding what's important and being able to tease that out and integrate that into how you're thinking about approaching the problem is a master skill to have. And I would have spent a lot more time there. But again, so hyper focused on those hard skills that I probably delayed some of that.
You know, I wrote this down. I was taking notes as we were talking, and one of the things I meant to mention before, and it just drives me nuts. But the feedback that you got from some of these recruiters, we want someone with specific UX skills and blah blah blah, and I think that just frustrates me so much when I see that, when the recruiters and I don't know if it's the hiring managers as much or just the recruiters being knuckleheads, but passing over people who could absolutely 100% do the job and probably do it really well, just because they didn't have that one little thing. You don't know Figma, or you haven't had this very specific experience. And again, these hard skills that are so easy to teach somebody. You pick up one design tool, you could literally master any design tool in a matter of weeks. I mean, maybe the key commands are different. Maybe they call the tool something else, but how you use it, how you think about using it doesn't change. And that just drives me nuts when I see recruiters passing up on people who have those really important skills that are very hard to learn often, and passing them up for people who have the hard skills, which are so easy to learn and might even. The other thing that's funny too is the way that one team works and the way that another team works are so drastically different in the world of software. I might have a hard skill and I could say I know how to use Figma, and you might use Figma a completely different way. You name your files differently. You have different layer structures. Your components are laid out in different ways. Like, yes, you're both using Figma, but they're completely different in how you're actually executing on the thing. And it just drives me nuts when I hear that, and I'm ranting. I'm going to get off my soapbox. I'm done talking about it. This isn't about me. This is about you. It's about you. All right. So anything before we get out of here, because I think we've been talking for quite a bit. Anything else before we get out of here that you think is important for people coming from one field to another, maybe industrial designers thinking about getting into UX? Anything we didn't talk about you think is worth pointing out?
No, I mean, I think we did a really good job of covering it. But like I said, I think anytime you're talking about a career pivot, right, that can be a little bit unnerving. So I would say is like really lean in and start thinking critically about what are your transferable skills, right? Whether it's ability to collaborate, are you a good writer? Do you listen well? And can you think of examples of how listening and empathy have driven or informed a decision that you made in a previous gig, right? There are, of course, those hard skills that we've talked about, but I think they're, dare I say, less important than a lot of those soft skills. Can you communicate well? Are you detail-oriented and can be organized? Do you learn quickly? Can you talk to that, right? I'm a quick study. I tend to be a very quick study, and I found that has really served me well. And so it's really being part of I think getting rid of some of that ambiguity and that nebulousness of switching into UX from another career is just understanding, identifying, and being very purposeful about what are my transferable skills, how do I talk about those through a UX lens, and how do I translate these skills and so that recruiters hear what they need to hear in order to get me to the next round, where I can really begin then to sell myself to the managers and others that are going to be working more closely with. That would sort of be my advice.
And one thing, I just want to throw this out there. I'm not saying you've said this. I'm not saying you said this. But one thing I hear people say a lot, and this drives me nuts, the fake it till you make it thing, lying about your skills, saying you did something when you didn't. Now, talking about transferable skills, there are a lot of transferable skills that, like you mentioned this, that would apply to UX for sure. And one of the things that it drives me crazy when I hear people say like, oh, I did UX. And it's like, you didn't do UX. That is very similar to how UX designers would do it,
right?
But that isn't UX. So like, they're like in your case, industrial design, I think that pretty much, I mean, you literally were designing the experience for a physical product, totally different. But I've heard other people, I've had conversations with other folks where it's like, yeah, it's similar. It's a similar process, but it isn't. You don't say it was UX. Like talk about how it's similar to UX and how you have that experience. So anyway, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I know you're not saying that. I just want to throw that out there. That's a caveat. I've heard that before. So cool. All right, dude. Well, we've got you for a little bit of time left. You got some time to answer some questions for all our guests, all our listeners out there, to get to know our guests a little bit better. You got some time to stick around?
Let's do it, man.
All right. First up, what's your favorite non-design book?
So this may be cheating a little bit, but it's technically not a design book. My favorite book of all time is called Made to Stick by Dan and Chip Heath.
Okay.
If you haven't read it, you have to read it. It's really all about the TLDR, as the kids say now, it's all about creating a mechanism of communicating your ideas in a way that make them sticky. So the book's premise is like, your idea could be the best idea that the company's ever seen, but if you don't package it in a way that's compelling and memorable and really resonant to the audience, then it could end up being on the cutting room floor.
Yeah.
And so it's really a book that has this, it's a success acronym. That's really like these 6 steps to like really filter your idea or your concept or whatever it is that you have through this filter to make sure that it's credible, that's memorable, et cetera, et cetera. So that book to me has been indispensable. I read it once a year, kind of as a refresher, because I find it to be maybe the single greatest resource for how to communicate ideas in a way that's resonant. I cannot recommend it enough. It's great.
Made to Stick. I haven't heard it, but I definitely want to check it out now. It sounds a lot like, very similar to sort of the Golden Circle, like Simon Sinek, why, the find your why kind of thing. You know, it's not what you do, it's why you do it. It's a similar kind of, I don't know, same vein maybe.
Yeah, it's certainly agnostic to career, right? Like that's a problem anywhere you work. I think it's absolutely a problem for designers because half the battle, I think, is making sure that we communicate ideas in a way that are resonant and relevant, right? And so it's a great book for that. But for anybody who's looking for like, how do I communicate an idea more impactfully and more comprehensively? That's the book for you.
Dude, I say this all the time, and this goes with relationships, obviously help here, but even just like you said, just telling the story about your idea. You could have the most amazing idea in the world. It could be the most beautiful design. If you can't get your team to build it, it was a total waste. So,
absolutely. 100%.
You know, that's such a great concept. Made to Stick. I'm going to have to check that out, man. What's your favorite non-design podcast? So your favorite podcast, not Beyond UX. I'm just kidding.
I was going to say, oh man, I'm actually a pretty big podcaster. I tend to like the audible medium more than the written word. I mean, I do both, but I find that I retain more through podcasts. So I tend to try to do a lot through that. My favorite non-design podcast, man.
It's a hard one.
It's a really tough one because there's so dang many. I would probably have to say The Daily. That's probably a really boring choice.
Dude, so many people have said The Daily. But it makes sense. It's like, I don't know. It's easy. It's quick. It's there. It's there every day. Great. It's informative.
Yeah.
I love it. I like The Daily too myself, but it's not that weird.
Yeah, that for me is the big thing. I mean, I recognize it. Like it probably speaks to like a certain political slant, which is not really like my intention. But it makes happenings digestible, right, for people that are busy. That's why I love it. It's like, give me what I need to know in 20 minutes. I don't have 3 hours to have a soliloquy on what's going on in the world. So give me 20 minutes. That's the attention span that this millennial has time for.
I love it, dude. All right, what's your favorite meal? And this could be something you've cooked, you've eaten out somewhere. It could be something your grandma used to cook, whatever you think. What's your favorite meal?
Yeah, I think this is something you and I have in common because I actually started my creative career as a chef. And so I was an apprentice chef.
Right on, dude.
Before I pivoted into industrial design. That was my first pivot.
So were you actually a working chef, or you just wanted to be a chef?
No, I was a working.
Wow, I didn't know that. I don't think I knew that. Did I know that?
I think we've had this exchange on LinkedIn before.
I think we've talked about it. Yeah, okay.
But I was an apprentice chef at a restaurant called the Rattlesnake Club in downtown Detroit, right on the river. And I worked there for a couple of years. And I thought I would want to be a chef. Like that coming out, I was like, yep, it's an engineer or chef. I'm going to go try being a chef. So in high school, I worked as a chef. And I realized I love cooking. I hate the industry of cooking.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And so I had to bail. But my favorite meal, man. So there is a scallop dish at my local restaurant called She Wolf that is absolutely phenomenal. It's a seared scallop with celery root puree dish that is just absolutely lights out. It is hands down the best meal in Detroit. It's absolutely phenomenal. That's if I could eat that every day for the rest of my life, I'd be totally happy.
Hell yeah, dude. I love it. Did you watch The Bear? I'm curious. You ever watch The Bear?
No, I haven't.
I think it's Hulu, I think, or Netflix.
Yeah, I probably should.
I liked it, dude. It's funny because I still have some friends back in New Orleans that are in the restaurant industry, and they were like, I can't watch it. It's got, it gives me PTSD. It brings back too much it brings too many horror stories, it triggers me when I watch The Bear. But anyway, that's a good show. It's funny because I actually have this idea for a topic about the restaurant industry and how it's somewhat similar to UX design, and thinking about, what can we take from UX, like specifically like mise en place, like prepping everything, getting all your stuff there and ready to go before you start a project, and taking that. And I don't know, I'm still kind of playing around with how to execute on that. But it's just
there's like a whole front of house, back of house piece there too, like a service blueprint, right?
Exactly, dude. Exactly. Yeah, you got your front stage, backstage, and all that. Yeah, and it's the stuff that people see in the front, and they very rarely see stuff in the back, unless it's one of those kitchens with the open,
right? Yeah,
and they can see all the chefs yelling at each other in the back.
Totally.
All right, I love it. I'm gonna have to check that out, man. We're only like 3 hours from Detroit, being in Cincinnati, so we gotta come hang out, man.
Come on, man.
Beer or something.
Let's do it.
All right. What's your favorite vacation spot?
Favorite vacation spot. So maybe this one's a little bit wonky. My favorite city in the country is Seattle. So, not super tropical, not known for its weather, but I absolutely love the city of Seattle. The cuisine, the people, the architecture, everything about Seattle is an absolute favorite. Don't make it out there very often. I have a cousin out there, so try to get out there, once every few years. But if not Seattle, any city in Western Michigan, South Haven, Saugatuck, Grand Haven, you name it. Western Michigan is our best kept secret, although that may not be true anymore after we tell millions of your followers about it.
Millions, yeah. The 100 of people. So we tried to book a trip. So coming up here, originally being from New Orleans, like Michigan was like across the country. Like, why, how are you going to get to Michigan without like a 2-3 day road trip? But now that we're up here in Cincinnati, we're so close, man. And we actually tried to book something, and we waited until like a month before. And I literally could not find a place to rent for 5 days anywhere in Western Michigan.
Yeah.
Like I looked in, I can't remember, Saugatuck, is that a place? Saugatuck, that's a city, I think. Did you just say Saugatuck? Yeah. So we looked there, I looked up and down, like, Mackinac Island, like everywhere, dude. I know that's not Western Michigan, but I couldn't find a place, dude. It was like, I'm like, well, we got to book this a year, but I think the secret's out. I think the secret's out. Secret's out.
I may have just ruined it for everybody. I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. I got to get out there, man. I've heard so many good things about Western Michigan and stuff. So that's on my bucket list, dude.
Let's do it.
All right. Last question. What is your favorite design tool that is not Figma?
That's a great question. I think this one's easy for me because it's the one I use the most and I find the most helpful. It's the manual sketching piece for me. And so if we can call the pen a tool, I would say that's my favorite.
Of course. That's a tool.
That's my favorite tool.
Pen and paper.
I do so much figuring of things out through sketching, thumbnailing, writing notes to myself, drawing shapes and figures, storyboarding, that I just don't think I could do any other way. And it's super critical to my process. And so pen and paper, man, like don't ever give up the pen and paper. If you think you're too good for pen and paper, then you're misguided.
Oh, dude, I went out and got like a fancy pen. Not fancy, it's like $10, but this is the Zebra F701. I love this pen. Carry with me everywhere. I got my field notes. I'm sketching stuff. I'm writing stuff all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm totally with you on that, dude. All right, man. Well, that is it. We're done. Before we get out of here, where can people find you if they want to connect, man?
Yeah, feel free to connect on LinkedIn. That's where I tend to spend most of my time. Matthew McPhail, easy to find. Happy to connect with anybody who's got questions or would just like to connect and learn more. I think one of the things about UX that I've learned, certainly through people like you, is how inclusive and helpful this community can be. And I certainly want to give back in any way I can. So LinkedIn's the place to find me, Matthew McPhail. Happy to connect with anybody that would love to.
Hell yeah. And just a note, it's McPhail with a PH.
That's right.
F. English is weird. But we'll link it in the show notes. So if anybody wants to connect with Matthew, he's an awesome dude, and you'll be happy you did.
All right.
Well, all right, y'all. That's it from Matthew and me for today. I hope we shed a little bit of light on one man's journey from industrial design to UX design. I hope you can take some key pointers away from Matthew's experience. But I'm curious, is there anybody out there who has made the switch from industrial design to UX design? What was that transition like? Was it different from Matthew? Let me know what you think on LinkedIn or shoot me an email at hello@beyonduxdesign.com. I'd love to hear from you. If you like what you heard today, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you feel like you're getting something out of the show, then I would love it if you left a 5-star review. Not just 5 stars, I'm talking about a couple sentences too. Apple loves that stuff, and obviously so do I. That would help me out so much more than you know. And if you know somebody who might find any of this stuff useful, then why don't you tell them about it? That would be fantastic. If you want to keep the show independent and ad-free, check out all those Patreon sponsorship packages at beyonduxdesign.com/support. You can join Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, and Kevin by supporting the show for as little as $3 a month. And there are some awesome perks like that badass holographic Beyond UX Design sticker. And Matthew, I'm going to send you one. Don't let me forget to get your address before we get out of here. You can get a shout on the show every week. There's even a package to meet with me for 30 minutes every month. Don't forget to head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/audible trial to download Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath. Sign up for a free 30-day Audible trial, cancel at any time, and the book is yours to keep forever. And in case you forgot, I've partnered with audible.com, so anytime you sign up for a free trial, you'll help support the show. There's no obligation, and you can cancel at any time, and the audiobook is yours to keep forever. So get a free audiobook on me and help support the show. Remember to sign up for the newsletter and check out all the past episodes along with all the show notes at beyonduxdesign.com. I hope you keep coming back for more great UX tips from Beyond UX Design. And until next time, remember, you're more than a designer because there's more to UX than design. I'll see you around. Take care, y'all. Damn it.
Uh-oh.
Freaking internet, dude. We pay for like the fancy internet too, which like drives me crazy.
I know, man.
I pay like 70 something bucks or $80 a month and it never works.